Nancy Cavey, National ERISA and Individual Disability Attorney. Welcome to Winning Isn't Easy. Before we get started today, I have to give you a legal disclaimer. This podcast is not legal advice. So off we go. Let's talk today about postural tachycardia syndrome, known as POTS, and your long-term disability insurance claim and the challenges that you are going to face. Now, I don't want you to make the mistake that just because your doctor diagnosed you with POTS, that you think that you are going to be getting FedEx a disability check from your disability carrier. Disability insurance companies are more than happy to collect your premium dollar, but like Scrooge, they don't want to pay a dime of disability benefits. POTS, which impacts over 3 million Americans, is a disorder of the autonomic nervous system that regulates our heart rate, our blood pressure, sweating, and body temperatures. I am seeing POTS cases not only in my practice generally, but I'm also seeing them in long-haul COVID cases. And so I think this podcast is very timely. Now, there are many things that disability insurance carriers don't understand. And one of the things they don't understand is that it's basically a blood circulation disorder that's characterized by two things. First, there are symptoms of lightheadedness with or without fainting. There's difficulty thinking and concentrating, sort of like brain fog. There's fatigue, there's exercise intolerance, headaches, blurry vision, palpitations, tremors, nauseousness, and a heart rate increase from horizontal to standing, or as tested on a tilt table, of at least 30 beats per minute in adults measured during the first 10 minutes of standing. So today we're going to talk about what disability insurance carriers don't understand and why they don't make it easy for those with a POTS claim to get the disability benefits they deserve. So I'm going to first talk about how disability carriers contest the diagnosis of POTS. Secondly, I'm going to talk about what disability carriers don't understand about the excessive heart rate increase issues in POTS cases. I'm also going to talk about what disability carriers don't understand about neuropathic POTS, hypovemic POTS, secondary POTS, and hyperadrenic POTS. Sorry about that. And I'm going to tell you the David versus Goliath story of Mrs. Outward, an electrical engineer with POTS. And lastly, we're going to talk about the subjective medical evidence defense. So before we dive in, let's take a break.
Have you been robbed of your peace of mind from your disability insurance carrier? You owe it to yourself to get a copy of Robbed of Your Peace of Mind, which provides you with everything you need to know about the long-term disability claim process. Request your free copy of the book at caveylaw.com today.
We've got a lot of stuff to cover today, which I think you're going to find to be fascinating. So welcome back to Winning Isn't Easy. I'm going to first talk about what disability carriers do or how disability carriers contest the diagnosis of POTS. Now, this is the first line of defense in a POTS disability insurance claim. Diagnosing POTS is complicated, and this complicated process plays right into the hands of a disability insurance carrier. And that is, there's no objective evidence for your POTS diagnosis, or we disagree that the tilt table test is really positive. Really? So this diagnosis is complicated because symptoms will vary from person to person, and they can also impact a wide range of organ systems. And it is also complicated because not all physicians get POTS. So let's start with the diagnosis process. It obviously starts with a physical examination, blood work, and the standing test or head-up tilt table test. Now, when you undergo a tilt table test, you're secured flat on a table that's raised to almost an upright position. Your heart rate, your blood pressure, and your blood oxygen and exhaled carbon dioxide levels are measured. Now, you might be diagnosed with POTS if you meet these three elements. First, you have an abnormal heart rate response to being upright. Secondly, your symptoms are worse when you're upright, and you don't develop the orthostatic hypotension in the first 3 minutes. Now, I've also had cardiologists misread the heart rate response. So we want to make sure that your cardiologist gets the reading correct, or I promise you, the carriers are going to question the test results. Now, the carriers should also be looking for other tests, objective testing for POTS. Now, disability carriers will generally consider that POTS tilt table test to be the gold standard. There are other tests that they should consider, but they always don't. And that's the Valsalva maneuver, which tests the response of the autonomic nerves that control your heart. There is the quantitative motor axon reflex test that measures your response of the autonomic nerves responsible for regulating sweating. There are also MRI and imaging test results to rule out tumors or other abnormalities. So there are times when I will actually suggest to my clients that they have these tests because it makes it harder for the disability carrier to deny the diagnosis. Now, POTS is generally only diagnosed when the orthostatic hypotension is present. I made a mistake there. POTS is only diagnosed when the orthostatic hypotension, which is a form of low blood pressure, is ruled out and when there's no acute dehydration or blood loss. So we've sort of covered the basics, if you will, of the diagnostic process, but there are also similar conditions that are at issue. What do I mean by that? You would think that the carrier simply must determine if you're disabled and not require a specific diagnosis. Unfortunately, it isn't always that simple because there are many times when the policy requires an actual diagnosis, and courts want to see the diagnosis. Now, part of the problem here is that there are many other medical conditions that have similar symptoms to POTS, and POTS can also complicate other health conditions. So, for example, it's not uncommon for a person who has ME/CFS to have fatigue, exercise intolerance, and the orthostatic intolerance. Those with sinus tachycardia also have a resting heart rate above 100 beats per minute. Fibromyalgia patients have gastroenterological issues such as irritable bowel syndrome, and they have excessive sweating. So again, when we're dealing with the diagnostic issues, I try to make sure that other conditions have been eliminated as part of the diagnostic process. Now, as I said, POTS can complicate other chronic medical conditions like asthma, inflammatory bowel disease, Lyme disease, autoimmune disease such as lupus or Sjogren's. And these days, it's also a known complications of COVID-19. So in those cases, the carriers generally wants to see the diagnosis of the COVID-19 and the positive tilt test results and other testing to eliminate any other diagnoses. Now, it's crucial that your physician document the objective basis of the diagnosis of the underlying medical condition and document the diagnosis of POTS and eliminate other causes for your symptoms. Now, that covers the waterfront, if you will, sort of into the issue of diagnosis, but your doctor should be addressing the impact of POTS and each of your underlying medical conditions individually and in combination. And I don't want to gloss over the fact that your doctor should address the POTS alone, because I want you to understand that if you have other medical conditions, I want the doctor to address those, and then I want the doctor to address the complications of the combination. In other words, I want the disability carrier to look at not only the underlying POTS diagnosis, any other medical conditions that you might have, and then the complications of the combination. And unfortunately, it may take more than one physician to address these issues, but I want to have the carrier consider your conditions individually and in combination. Now, the lack of documentation from your physician can play right into the carrier's hand. Documentation forms the basis of that diagnosis, and we want to make sure that you have all the testing that confirms the diagnosis of POTS and all the documentation that eliminates other diagnoses. So we want to make sure that your doctor has an adequate fund of information from you and your symptoms so that they can make an informed diagnosis. And part of that, I think, is for you to start keeping a diary of your symptoms and how those symptoms impact your ability to function. Because I don't want the disability carrier to wrongfully deny your claim by challenging the diagnosis or your restrictions and limitations. Next, I'm going to talk about what disability carriers don't understand about the excessive heart rate issues in POTS cases. So stay tuned. Let's take a break.